Someone likened the journalism field to me to the car industry. You know, when cars were first invented, there were all these car companies, and now there's, I don't know how many.
The sports world is one that's forever evolving, and that leads to frequent, drastic changes when it comes to how sports are being covered. Everyone wants to know where the field is or where it's heading as things shift, but in order to do that, you have to know where it's coming from. No matter what, everyone always remembers what the business was like when they first started their careers.
What was the field like when you got into it? How has it kind of evolved over the last, I don't know, couple decades at this point?
I mean, I've been here since 2001, and it's changed massively from then.
I like storytelling, and I always watched the local news growing up, probably even more so than ESPN. That might put me in the minority, I'm not sure. But I always loved the sports anchor on a local news station.
Just look at the show that I do. I mean, Sports Center with Dan and Keith became this thing, and there were certainly people before Dan and Keith, but I think they're always mentioned as like when Sports Center became something different, I guess, because of how they did it. And in 2001, 2, 3, it was still that. There was still no bottom line, there was still no Twitter, there was no, you weren't fighting with the internet.
Having watched those guys growing up, I wanted to do what they did.
You know, my career started right at the beginning. You know, there used to be a time where you went into the office and you talked to the veteran reporters, and that's how you learned how to be a beat reporter, how to be a columnist, how, this interview or this subject is really giving me a hard time.
You think it's fair? I have no comment. That's just ridiculous.
And they would offer you advice because you get to talk to the people who had done it.
It's changed. I'm sitting on a set as a one-man host of a show that's sort of a hybrid of radio and demands more opinion of the host and looks for more personality from the host. That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago, I don't think.
I think that those people and those personalities are kind of the pillars upon which the brand was built, and I wanted to be that. I thought that you could come into people's homes.
Tom Leyden with you for the Sports Wrap.
And it was more than just sports. It was a part of their lives.
I guess our show, the hour we do, is probably the best reflection of how differently ESPN and or the world looks at how TV is produced as it relates to sports.
You pick different paths and you sort of decide which pool you want to swim in. And for me, this was the pool I wanted to swim in. So it has some positives, it has some negatives, and every day you go in just understanding that you got to deal with both.
Now, you can't help but notice the changes. With the rise of social media and upgraded technology, news is being broken at an instant, and sports journalism is forever evolving.
There was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was no immediacy to what we were doing.
The advent of the internet and being able to wirelessly file your stories and not even have to go into the office anymore, it changed all of that. And it changed, like I said, blogging. Blogging it changed everything.
And I recall coming here in 2005 when I was working in Michigan covering the NCAA tournament, and we were in Worcester, and everything we shot was with eyes on the 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock news. I mean, those days are done. When you shoot something now, it's somehow being shared within 5-10 minutes, whether it be a picture, whether it be a small video clip, or you're putting it to your Facebook page, or you're putting it to your Twitter page.
There used to be, if I broke a story and I filed it at 9 o'clock on Wednesday night, it was in Thursday's paper, and none of my competitors had it. They wouldn't have it until Friday's paper. But then with blogging, if you posted something at 8 p.m., they could have this confirmation of the story and maybe in advance the story a little bit by 9 or 9:30 p.m.
We're supposed to be journalists. So journalists, they don't do commercials. They don't wear their favorite team's jersey on the air. When they have information, they confirm it. They don't just tweet it out and hope it's right. And this idea of getting it first, whether it's right or not, that's the hugest problem of all.
The tool that social media can be is undeniable. The danger is in using the opinion that you see in just the people you follow to shape your worldview and to have that become, oh, this is what everyone thinks.
So it's become much easier, but with the ease has come the expectation that, well, why isn't it here now? What's taking you so long? So that's very, very different, and it's made, life more challenging, but also more exciting.
If you're only looking through, if that's your lens, right, Well, what can I see out there? I don't know. I can see how much I can see through that. You got to look through a bigger lens at the world to recognize that it's not just that. You can't program through that. If you do, well, then you're going to get a look at the world, because that's not good enough to see through.
You know, what I do now, I write from home. I've been able to raise my younger daughters and be with them. That's not something I ever would have imagined 15, 16 years ago.
No matter where you are, for the most part, as long as you've got a cell signal, you can go live and broadcast. And I look forward to 5, 10 years from now seeing where that goes, because in my mind, I envision every photographer has the ability to hit a button and he or she is live on Twitter. But who would have known we'd come to the point where we are now, even 5, 10 years ago?
As some choose to solely get their news through their phones or computers, those making the decisions behind the scenes are forced to change how they operate, whether they're writing stories or putting together highlights. Some, however, feel that the same basic principles still apply.
Great question, the million-dollar question. How do we exist? Why do we exist? What's our purpose?
We've already seen like a big shift away from the traditional game story, because anybody who has a phone can watch as many highlights as they want.
It used to be you turned on ESPN and you watched SportsCenter, and that's where you got all your news. That, you know, people's appetites have changed, their habits have changed. Everybody's looking at their phone 24/7. So we have mobile apps, we have ways for you to see online live video, and all those things are changing at a very rapid rate. And I think it still can be very effective.
I resist the idea that, oh, well, you can see this on your phone. Yeah, all right, you can see it on your phone. And then if it's a great play or a great moment, you can watch it on your big-ass television in your house later that day. And why you would not want to do that, I don't know.
I think people need to understand that I'm going to bring a different perspective into their living rooms every night. And really, they're going to want to watch me because they like me. So they got to figure out a way to connect with me, and I have to figure out a way to connect with them.
I would completely resist the idea that people would not want to see that again and would rather see some manufactured arguing about something. I don't do that. I won't.
They want to hang around through the end of the newscast to watch sports because, like, you know what, I like the way that guy does that. And maybe he brings you a different story, or he puts a different twist on it, or you like his language.
But the idea that you'd have to create some angst and arguments to be compelling, I just disagree with that. It works for people. It would never work for me. I couldn't do it.
When you're talking about how people are watching Monday through Sunday, every newscast, how are you reaching them? In my mind, it's got to be because they like the people and the way those people deliver the news.
So now it's more in the personality of the host, the opinion of the host, but then the people out there have to be interested in the personality of the host and the opinion of the host. That's hard too.
Everyone likes to talk about the present, the power of social media, the state of the newspaper business, how people are consuming their news. Perhaps the biggest changes come with who's delivering the news. A once male-dominated field has seen historic strides in the right direction, with women breaking news, hosting shows, and shining on commentary.
Yeah, so when I first started, 95% of the time I was the only woman at the event. And after a while, that just became normal.
And I just always felt like I had to be the most prepared, media person in the room, because it wasn't going to be just accepted.
We all have the horror stories of the early years, of people that didn't want you in the locker room, of managers. I remember a Red Sox manager, I asked him a question, he didn't answer it. 2 seconds later, another writer asked the same question and he answered it expansively.
I was told one time Aaron Hernandez should have shot me as well as shooting whatever victims he had. I've been told I should have been writing for Ladies' Home Journal instead of the Providence Journal.
Players that really had issues with you in the locker room, and I used to tell them, I don't want to be in here either. I'm guessing the guys that are covering you don't particularly want to be in here. It's an uncomfortable environment, but this is my job, and that's all it is. It's just my job.
I know who I am as a person. I am a wife. I am a mother. I am many, many things, and none of that gives you the right to call me the C word.
So I had run-ins with Red Auerbach, who became a great friend. He didn't want me in his locker room. I remember Jack Bicknell at Boston College when I covered those great football teams, during the Flutie years. He didn't want me in the locker room, and I said, all right, but just understand what a disadvantage I'm, at if you don't let me in there. So he banned everybody from the locker room. So of course I wasn't very popular with the other writers because of that.
Despite the criticism at times, women in the field are powering through and establishing themselves as staples in the sports world.
You know, why are you so offended that a woman is writing about whatever it is?
Some of the best journalists in the country are women. We mentioned Adrian Wojnarowski, breaking news. Well, my colleague Ramona Shelburne is right up there with him in terms of breaking news. We have Doris Burke, who just received the Kurt Gowdy Award from the Naismith Hall of Fame, who's doing play-by-play, color, and sideline in the NBA. Who's more versatile than that? I can't think of a one man that's been able to do all those things. So the industry, in terms of that, has been broken wide open, and I'm thrilled about it.
A lot of sports journalism and journalism in general is telling stories. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or green or purple or red. If you can get somebody to tell them your story and you can share their story, or you watch a game and you can tell people what happened at that game, that shouldn't, you know, gender shouldn't matter.
Another trend showing up in who delivers sports news grows each and every year, with players beginning to show up on the microphone or as writers for stories. In some cases, it's a player joining the media world, looking for a way to stick around the sports they love.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is generally speaking, when you find guys that come into media from football, they obviously have a love of the game. I mean, you wouldn't want to do this if you didn't have that background, but the other alternative is often coaching. You know, do you want to be sort of ensconced in that? Do you want to be every day, 60, 70, 80-hour week of continuing to teach other people to play the game, or do you want to talk about it?
The toughest transition for all players, you know, leaving the field and going into television was the asking the questions. You know, we always answer the questions. So that transition was still this day is tough for me sometimes.
I think ultimately it came down to me where it was more of the communications of the love, and it's sort of maybe almost like a backwards teaching kind of situation. Say, hey, here's what I appreciated about it. Communication skills are really what that part of the job is more about, less so than just acumen and playing the game. So I felt like that kind of fit me.
You know, it's baseball, and you're talking baseball, and so it's almost like never had to change who I am, and can be yourself on television, and still make mistakes and laugh at yourself like you know I did when I played in the clubhouse.
As a player, there's certain things you look for from your playing days that you identify with very quickly.
I think we get to a point now where there's an expectation that a reporter would have an expertise. They shouldn't. They're great at transmitting information, you know, passing it from whatever it is the players can get them, whatever they can discern from the film, and sending it to the public. But that doesn't mean as an intermediator they're an expert at any level, and that's okay.
So you still have to figure that fine line between providing the analysis and the critiques without being too hard, and then also providing that audience with all the information they're going to need to enjoy the game and fully understand what's going on.
To me, it was always sort of a lesson that no matter how much you know it from the outside, I mean, you can be Troy Aikman, you can be Peyton Manning, you can be Tony Romo now, the most experienced guy in the world. You don't really know exactly what the call is. So to me, that makes me hedge my comments. And that's not a matter of sort of trying to give guys a break. It's just the reality of the situation. It's really understanding what is going on out there and what isn't.
In other cases, players still in their primes are choosing to control their own message. With the rise of sites like the Players Tribune and social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram, reporters are left to wait for some players to put out their own information, leaving some to wonder if the trend is becoming an issue.
These players these days, you know, you got a lot of action going. You got phones, you got social media, you got Instagram, you got Twitter, you got FaceTime, you got whatever it is. It's quick and bam.
They'll coexist because that's just like look at LeBron's announcement on. He announced it was a press release.
Yeah.
They put it out. Signed with the Lakers. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
There's a
little different than the decision.
Sure, you're in charge of your message.
There's a brand they're trying to protect, and there's a shoe deal. There's something, you know, they have 1 million followers, so there's money in those situations, you know, to promote something. So it becomes a little distracting, I think, at times, and they almost want to be a social media star.
Players more than ever are aware of that, and those that want to craft an image and are careful about it and want to control the message, which is fair. I mean, you want to be in charge of your message and your content. That will continue to be.
I'm in favor of it, obviously. When we started football, the whole idea there is that you could have guys that could speak to what they were speaking about. I mean, you would never people don't become plumbers by staring into urinals. We all do that each and every day, right? That doesn't make you a professional. It's not the amount of hours you log doing something. It's whether or not you actually have an expertise to what you're speaking to.
Well, I'm surprised it's taken this long for players to figure that out. I will say this, though. Players controlling their own message, there is a reason they're not journalists. They're not very good at it.
Is it ideal? No. Is it the best way for an athlete to get out a very sophisticated, well thought out message? No question. And then what happens is like next phase. How are people going to respond to it? What kind of questions are you going to ask about what he or she just wrote?
So when they control their own message, they can break news, that's fine. But when they start writing these long pieces and doing their own documentaries, they're boring, they're not interesting, and they're completely squeaky clean. And so therefore they don't hold any knowledge for us or any interest for us.
One of the other problems with the Players Tribune type of things is there's no pushback. And there are no follow-up questions. And those stories are written by ghostwriters who talk to the players and try to write it in their voice or get the crux of what they're trying to say out there. But it's almost like public relations, not journalism.
But a star of the level of Gordon Hayward, he wants to be in charge of a message. It was a tough place to leave. It was tough for him to leave Utah, and he wanted to explain that and go through the process, and so he writes something. Well, you'll see more people do that, I think, because there's value in it, and it's a good way to continue to be in charge of your brand and your message.
For players to think, well, we don't need journalism, we don't need the media, they're wrong. They can thank us for creating, the icon that is LeBron James, for instance, or Michael Jordan.
That's the problem with the Players Tribune type sites, is that yes, it's a good thing that they're controlling the message, but they're letting you know what they want you to know. And that's not really journalism, that's more PR.
Figure out a way to dissect what someone might be writing on their Instagram page, Facebook page, in an article that they write for the Players Tribune or another players-driven website. It's changed the dynamic. It has opened the door more, but it has changed the dynamic of how we deal with the athletes.
We talk a lot about the past, present. I mean, the key thing everyone wants to know about is the future. Where do you think this field is heading? Having known the ins and outs, I know it's an impossible, vague question, but where do you see this field heading over the next 5-10 years at this point?
It really is so hard to answer that.
I do worry where we're headed.
I'm going to play to camera. I have no clue.
I can't wait to find out, because imagine a day when you have a camera or a phone or whatever it might be at the time, and at a moment you're live internationally and you're getting a story out there immediately. It'll get better. It's not perfect now. You can argue right now and say, well, you can do that now. You can, but it's not really 100% mainstream yet.
I have no idea. And it's a fascinating question, and I think it's really the premise behind what you guys are doing, and I think it's a fun thing to explore. But I can't imagine what it is or what it looks like.
It's terrifying, really, because I think the business model behind this sort of drives the air quote journalism portion to it. And to me, it's this gray line of what is journalism and what is just clicks and that sort of click harvesting. And I think that's really the problem.
3 years ago, we started doing this show. 5 years ago, I never would have dreamed that I would be given the space to do this. I don't know how many years from now, this show, as we're doing it, will reach a point where people go, no, I'm done with that. So then it'll be incumbent upon me to figure out, well, what interests me and what's something that our viewers would be interested in.
If you can get to something that simply gets volume, and the volume is paid at a certain rate, and that's how the model works, how can you possibly get to where you want to get right answers? You want to get true and honest and fair answers that might get at a lower rate.
I think people are starting to really embrace again and remember, like, oh, there's a who, there's a where, there's a what, there's a why, there's a when, there's a how. Like, it's more than just Team X traded for player Y. Well, why did they do that? How does this piece fit into the puzzle? Who is this person they're bringing in?
Invariably, the long form piece, the research piece, the multi-sourced piece, those are always going to be there, but they're not daily. It might be a months of research to put out that one piece, and that one piece might hit at an extremely lower rate than some guy connecting a guy's tweet.
Is everything going to be broken on Twitter? Is there going to be a new kind of venue or vehicle that we don't even know about yet?
10 years ago, I never would have dreamed that I was breaking stories on a medium that at the time only allowed me to type 140 characters into my phone. And I regularly broke stories on Twitter. And it happens still. We just get a few more characters now.
If you're looking for like a drastic 180 where it suddenly is a profoundly different thing, I don't think it'll be that. I mean, this SportsCenter is different than the one Dan and Keith did because Dan and Keith didn't have the internet, didn't have Twitter, right? They didn't compete with that. They were telling you things you didn't know the answer to. Everybody's already got the answers to the test.
But I think what's important is, reporters who can say, oh, that basket in the third quarter, that came after, he had been struggling for the last, 3 weeks with that shot or from that spot or whatever.
Someone likened the journalism field to me to the car industry. When cars were first invented, there were all these car companies, and now there's, I don't know how many. Are we going to get to the point where there's only, 10 major newspapers? And I'm sad too. The biggest thing, the thing that made the Globes work so well was the Boston Herald. They were so great. They pushed you. You went to the newspaper store every morning and bought your Globe, but you bought your Herald to see if you got beat. And there's nothing like a 2-paper newspaper town. And you can count on one hand how many of those there are left.
I think the bigger problem that we face that I'm curious, I don't know the answers to where we sit 5 or 6 years from now, is when you ask a journalist to put 100 pieces of information out there, what percentage of those can possibly fit that sort of journalistic standard? I mean, it's got to be a small percentage, right? If you just are forced to put volume, every piece of volume or every piece in that sort of set isn't necessarily good, and that's not their fault.
So it's hard, man. It's a hard riddle to solve, and it's one that on a daily basis we're trying to figure out how to get right for us. And I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by a bunch of smart people. And we figure if it lands in a good place for us, then it will for our viewers as well.
After all of this change, it's going to continue to evolve. Some people like to say the future of the field hasn't even been invented yet. But there will always be stories to be told and a way for them to be spread out to the world. The future of the field may change, and the way you get your stories will always shift, but the basics have been, still are, and always will be there. And that will never change.
I don't think that the television like this, as we know it, will go away. If we follow the NBA Finals, I think people are still interested in hearing me talk to, or somebody, it doesn't have to be me, talk to Steve Kerr and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and Andre Iguodala and Klay Thompson. Yeah. That was our show. I think people are still interested in that. Perfect. So it'll be whatever the version of that is 5 years from now. I'll be interested to see. Maybe I'll be doing it. Maybe I'll have tapped out by then.
Figure out ways to tell good stories in different ways. Find things that the masses are not focused on. I think if you can figure out a way to do something that's different and unique and really touches the heart and soul of people who you're trying to reach, they're going to come back to you and they're going to understand that you provide to them something valuable. That's what I try to do even now. That's why we do our in-depth episodes, because we want to be able to touch people's hearts and tell stories that are good and do things that are different than just, hey, we were at practice today and this is what the athlete said. I want to tell the stories that people experience on a day in, day out basis.
At first, the goal of this project was to find answers about where this field is heading. The end result? It was what it should always be: a story.